The Princess and the General. The banners of Lysandra rippled beneath the sullen autumn sky. Crimson and gold, the colours of victory. The great courtyard of the royal citadel swelled with nobles and soldiers, courtiers in silks and warriors in dented armour. Trumpets flared from the ramparts, announcing the king's return from war. But it was not the king the people cheered for. It was the man who walked a pace behind him, General Caelvarin, the Black Wolf of Lysandra. He wore no jewels, no golden sash, no crown of laurels. His armour, though burnished for the ceremony, still bore the faint scars of battle. A tear at the shoulder plate, a dent along the vambrus, a dark stain that no polishing could fully erase. His expression was carved from stone, unreadable yet commanding. And from the marble balcony above, Princess Ilara watched him. The wind lifted the sheer veil draped across her shoulders, carrying with it the scent of lavender from the gardens below. She stood beside her father, King Alden, the Lion of Lysandra, and though her face was composed, her heart trembled like the fabric at her throat. It was the first time she had seen him, the man who had defended their borders for 6 long years, who had turned the tides of battles her court poets sang of nightly. She had imagined him countless times, older, perhaps, or crueler, a man born only to kill. Yet, as he knelt before her father, she saw none of that. Cael's head bowed low, his voice steady. "Your Majesty, the western front is secured. Lysandra stands unbroken." King Alden's booming laughter echoed across the hall. "Unbroken, yes, thanks to my wolf. Rise, Caelvarin, saviour of the realm." Applause thundered through the marble hall. Ilara's mother, Queen Seraphine, smiled with practised grace, her jewelled fingers clinking softly as she clapped. But Ilara's eyes remained fixed on the man who rose to his feet. He was not as old as she'd expected, perhaps 30 at most. His hair was dark, sun-warmed bronze under the torchlight, and his eyes, gods, those eyes, were grey like a storm over the sea. They met hers only once, fleetingly, and yet it felt like the world tilted beneath her feet. Something passed between them in that moment. Not recognition, but something deeper, something dangerous. The rest of the ceremony dissolved into a blur. Names were praised, titles awarded, goblets raised in celebration. Yet Ilara heard little of it. Her mind replayed the single look that had pierced through a hall full of noise and crowns. When the banquet began that night, the royal table stretched endlessly beneath chandeliers of carved crystal. Roasted pheasants, honeyed apples, and sugared almonds filled the air with heady sweetness. Laughter spilled like wine, but Caelvarin did not laugh. He sat at the far end of the hall among his captains, answering questions when addressed but speaking little. His posture was impeccable, his restraint almost inhuman. And yet, every so often, Ilara found his gaze lingering, not long enough to be called bold, but long enough to brand itself upon her thoughts. "You stare too openly, my daughter," her mother murmured, her voice low and edged. "Do not forget, he serves your father, not you." Ilara lowered her eyes. "I was only curious, mother. He's not what I imagined. No man ever is, especially the ones who can ruin you." Her mother turned back to the table, her smile fixed. But Ilara's heart no longer obeyed reason. Later that evening, when the courtiers danced and music filled the air, Ilara slipped away from the great hall. The night was cold and silver, moonlight spilling across the courtyard's marble steps. She breathed deeply, grateful for solitude, until a voice broke the silence. "Your Highness shouldn't wander alone." She turned. Kyle Varin stood at the edge of the colonnade, half his face shadowed beneath the moonlight. He had discarded his ceremonial cloak, and without the weight of court around him, he looked almost human. Elara hesitated, heart leaping. "And yet you wander too, General. Should I send a guard to escort you back to the feast?" The faintest curve touched his lips, not quite a smile, but close. I needed air. So did I. For a moment, silence, the kind that thrums, alive and wordless. Kyle inclined his head respectfully. "I hope the festivities have pleased you, Princess. The people needed a celebration after so much blood." His voice, steady, deep, carrying the fatigue of someone who had seen too much, drew her in more than any courtly flattery could. "Do you ever tire of war, General?" she asked softly. He paused. "War doesn't tire of men like me, Your Highness." The words struck her. There was no bitterness in them, only truth. Elara stepped closer, the hem of her gown whispering across the marble. "Then what do you fight for?" He looked at her fully then, his storm-grey eyes catching the moonlight. "For Lysandra, for the crown I swore to protect. And if that crown demanded your heart?" For a moment, he said nothing. Only the sound of the wind through the columns filled the space between them. Then he bowed, low and precise. Then my heart would no longer be mine to keep. Before she could respond, he turned and walked back into the shadows, leaving her alone beneath the moon, breathless, shaken, and forever changed. From that night onward, Elara found herself listening for his name in every council meeting, every messenger's report. The princess and the general, two souls bound by a single glance, both imprisoned by duty and desire, neither dared speak. And somewhere deep within her chest, where reason should have ruled, something wild had begun to bloom, something that could break a kingdom. A whisper beneath the rose garden. The first frost came early that year. It crept down from the northern peaks, frosting the battlements in thin silver threads, and turning the palace gardens into a world of glass and breath. The war banners had been lowered. The soldiers' songs faded into the sound of crackling fires. For a brief moment, the kingdom of Lysandra seemed at peace. But peace was rarely kind to those who had lived too long in the shadow of war. Elara spent her mornings in the palace library, where the smell of parchment and lavender oil soothed her nerves. Yet, even there, she could not escape the whispers. Of her father's council plotting new alliances, of her name spoken in marriage bargains, of General Kyle Varin summoned daily to the throne room for counsel. "He's become indispensable, Lady Mirren, her lady-in-waiting," murmured one afternoon, arranging scrolls upon the table. "The king trusts him more than half the council. Some say he's to be made Lord Commander soon." Elara's quill stilled above the parchment. "Does he seek such a title?" Mirren laughed softly. "Men like him don't seek power. Power seeks them." Elara smiled faintly, though her heart beat faster. The last time she had seen Kale had been during a council banquet, a fleeting glance across a room of silks and crowns. He had not approached her, nor she him, but the weight of that unspoken pull lingered still. That evening, as dusk fell like ink across the horizon, Elara escaped the noise of courtly chatter. She slipped through the side corridors, her satin slippers soundless on cold marble floors, and descended toward the gardens, her only refuge from the suffocating grandeur of the palace. The garden of Lysandra was unlike any in the realm. Ancient rose bushes lined its walls, their blossoms still clinging stubbornly to life despite the season's chill. White, crimson, and the rare black rose of the royal crest. Chaol's campaign standard bore the same symbol she remembered. She moved through the rows of flowers until the scent of roses filled her lungs. And then a voice. Low, quiet, unmistakable. "Your Highness!" Her heart leapt. She turned. Chaol stood at the edge of the moonlit path, cloaked in black, his armour traded for a simple leather tunic. His sword was still at his side, a man never fully without it. Elara caught her breath. "General, you walk the gardens at night too?" He hesitated, a flicker of amusement ghosting across his features. "Forgive me. I thought the gardens belonged to the royal family alone. I didn't expect to find their heir wandering unguarded." "Perhaps the heir needed a moment without eyes following her," she said softly. "Perhaps she thought the night would keep her secrets. Then I'll pretend I've seen nothing." His tone was light, but the words carried weight. A quiet vow. Elara smiled, a rare, unguarded one. "Do you ever tire of pretending, General?" He met her gaze, the moonlight cutting silver into his eyes. "All the time." They stood among the roses in a silence that said too much. The air between them seemed alive, fragile, dangerous, and unspoken. Elara turned to pluck a pale bloom from its stem. "These roses bloom year-round," she murmured, "even when frost bites. My mother says it's because they were first planted with the blood of Lysandra's founders." Chaol glanced at the flower in her hand. "Blood keeps kingdoms alive longer than love does." "And yet love is what songs remember." His eyes softened, just a fraction. "Songs are written by those who never fought for the crown they praise." "Do you fight for the crown, Chaol Varyn?" It was the first time she had spoken his name aloud. It slipped from her lips like a secret. Chaol inhaled sharply, almost imperceptibly, before answering, "I fight because it's the only thing I know how to do." That sounds like sorrow, not loyalty. Perhaps they're the same. The faintest tremor passed through her hand. She didn't know if it was from the cold or the nearness of him, but when he noticed, Chaol hesitated, then reached out. Slowly, reverently, his gloved hand closed over hers, steadying the rose before its thorns could pierce her skin. "Careful, princess," he murmured. "Even beauty draws blood." Her breath caught. "And yet you touch it anyway." For one suspended moment, the world narrowed to that single touch. Leather over silk, warmth against cold. Chaol's jaw tightened. Then he stepped back, letting her go as if it burned him. "Forgive me. I shouldn't—" "You didn't offend me," she interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. He bowed his head. "You don't understand, Your Highness. The king would have my head if he knew I'd spoken to you like this. And would you still have spoken, knowing that?" His eyes met hers, steady and storm-touched. "I would have," he said quietly. Silence hung like glass between them. A bell rang from the tower, the signal for curfew. The sound scattered the moment like shards of light. Chaol straightened, his expression once again the soldier's mask she knew he wore too well. "You should go, princess." "And if I don't?" "Then I'll be forced to escort you myself." Her smile was small, wistful. "Then perhaps I shall linger." Chaol exhaled softly, almost a laugh, but not quite. "You tempt fate, Your Highness." "Fate," she murmured, brushing her fingers along a crimson rose, "has already found me." Before he could reply, she turned and walked back toward the palace. Her steps were measured, but her pulse raced, echoing his words in her mind. Behind her, Chaol stood among the roses, watching her disappear into the shadows of the great stone archways. When she was gone, he reached for the rose she had touched, the one that had almost cut her. A single drop of her blood still marked its thorn, glinting faintly in the moonlight. He closed his eyes and whispered, not to the gods but to the night itself, "Forgive me, princess. Whatever this is, it cannot last." Yet, as he turned away, a faint wind stirred through the garden, carrying the scent of roses, of fate, and of something neither duty nor distance could extinguish. The weight of a crowned snow fell on Lysandra the day the announcement was made. Soft, silent, and merciless, the kind of snow that made the world look pure, even as it buried everything beneath it. The great hall of the palace was filled with nobles, ambassadors, and soldiers. The smell of pine resin burned in the braziers, mingling with the heavy perfume of courtly women and the damp leather of armored men. The king stood at the dais, his voice resounding through the vaulted chamber. By the will of the crown and the grace of the gods, the kingdom of Lysandra shall join in eternal alliance with Ilaris. My daughter, Princess Ilara, is hereby betrothed to Prince Adrian of Ilaris. Let this union ensure peace for generations to come. Applause echoed, polite and hollow. Ilara stood beside her father, her hands folded so tightly that the knuckles blanched white beneath her gloves. She bowed her head in practiced serenity, though her mind roared with a storm of disbelief. Across the hall, among the line of armoured officers, Kael Varin stood at attention. His face betrayed nothing. A soldier's face, trained, unreadable, yet Ilara felt the tremor in her chest when their eyes met for a single devastating instant. There was no shock in his gaze, only sorrow, quiet, deep, and infinite. The king raised his goblet in toast, and the courtiers cheered. The sound was unbearable. That night, Ilara sat before her mirror, the gold comb slipping through her hair without thought. Her mother entered quietly, draped in mourning silk despite the celebration. "You did well today," the queen said softly. "You didn't tremble." "I was too numb to tremble," Ilara murmured. The queen's reflection met hers in the mirror, older, wiser, but shadowed by the same sorrow that now lived in her daughter's eyes. "You think this is cruelty?" Seraphine said gently. "It isn't. It's the world as it's always been. Our lives are not our own, Ilara. They belong to the crown." "And what of the heart?" The queen smiled, but it was a smile edged with bitterness. "The heart is a luxury for those who don't wear crowns." Ilara turned away. "Then why does it ache so much to lose what I never had?" The queen did not answer. She only laid a hand on her daughter's shoulder and whispered, "Endure, my child. That is what queens do." 2 days later, Kael received his orders. He was to escort the Ilarian envoy back across the border and ensure the safe arrival of the dowry and the royal contracts. He read the decree in silence, the king's wax seal gleaming crimson in the candlelight. His lieutenant, Darren, lingered nearby. "You don't have to do this yourself, Commander," Darren said. "You could delegate it." Kael folded the parchment carefully. "If the king entrusts me with peace as he did with war, I will see it through." "You don't sound convinced." Kael looked up, and for the first time his composure cracked just slightly. "I'm not." The journey began at dawn. The roads south were lined with frost, the air sharp with the scent of pine and iron. Kael rode at the head of the column, his cloak heavy with snow, his thoughts heavier still. He remembered the garden, the rose, the touch, her voice saying his name. He told himself he would forget, that he must, but memory is a stubborn thing, and the heart even more so. On the 4th day of the march, as they crossed the frozen plains of Elder, Kael halted the convoy. He dismounted, brushing snow from his gloves when one of his scouts approached. "Message from the palace, sir," the man said, handing him a sealed letter. The seal was small and delicate, not the royal crest, but the mark of the princess's hand. His pulse quickened. He broke it open. Inside, a single page written in hurried ink. "General, if loyalty binds you, then I shall not ask you to break it. But if fate still listens, meet me once more in the gardens upon your return." He read it again and again until the ink blurred in the snowlight. Then he folded it close to his chest. The return to Lysandra came sooner than expected. The envoy was satisfied. The treaty was signed. The king welcomed them with feasts and ceremony. But Chaol's heart was elsewhere, waiting for the moon to rise, for the palace to sleep. When at last the torches burned low and the halls grew still, he made his way to the gardens. Snow blanketed the roses now, their thorns buried, their beauty hidden beneath white silence. And there she was, waiting beneath the marble archway, wrapped in a cloak of silver fur, her breath misting in the cold air. Elara turned at the sound of his footsteps. "You came." "I shouldn't have. Nor should I. And yet here we are." They stood a breath apart, the distance between them fragile as ice. "You're to be married," Chaol said quietly, "to a man I've never spoken to. He'll keep the peace. That's worth something. And if peace costs me everything I am—" Chaol's eyes closed briefly, the struggle plain in the set of his jaw. "Then you bear it, as your crown demands." "You speak as if you know what it is to bear a crown." "No," he said softly, "but I know what it is to bear chains." Her breath caught. "And am I your chain, Chaol Varin?" He stepped closer. The air between them shivered. "You are what I'll never be free of." The snow fell harder. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolled midnight. For a moment, they were the only two souls in the world, the soldier and the princess, standing on the edge of duty and ruin. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. "I can't." And then his hands were on her, face warm against the cold, and he kissed her, not as a man claims, but as one who finally breaks. The kiss was desperate, trembling, filled with everything they had denied themselves. It tasted of winter and sorrow, and the weight of every oath he'd ever sworn. When they parted, Elara's eyes glistened like moonlit glass. "If the gods are cruel," she whispered, "they will let me remember this." Chaol's voice was raw. "They are cruel, princess. They always are." He turned from her before he could lose himself again, his breath ragged in the snow. Elara watched him disappear into the night, the man who had sworn to protect her crown, but had just stolen her heart. And in that moment, she understood the truth her mother had never spoken aloud. A crown weighs nothing compared to love. And yet love can destroy empires. When steel meets silence, winter melted reluctantly into spring, and with it came unrest. Rumors drifted through Lysandra's capital like smoke. Whispers of rebellion in the southern provinces, of border villages burned in the night. The peace forged through Elara's betrothal trembled, fragile and false. The council met daily, their voices echoing through the marble corridors. Chaol was summoned again and again, his maps spread across tables, his every word measured, his every breath weighed by those who envied his influence. King Alden trusted him still, but trust, in a kingdom built on fear, was never more than a blade's width from suspicion. And Elara felt it, the slow tightening of a noose she could not yet see. The morning the summons came, Chaol stood on the battlements, watching the horizon darken with storm clouds. Darin approached, his cloak whipping in the wind. "The rebels have taken the southern fortress of Arven," Darin said grimly. "The king wants you to lead the counterstrike." Kyle's jaw clenched. "When do we march?" "By nightfall." He nodded once, turning his gaze toward the palace. Toward the tower window where he knew she stood. That evening, as preparations filled the courtyards, Elara found him in the stables. The smell of horses, leather and rain filled the air. He was fastening the clasp on his saddle when she entered, her cloak hooded against the wind. "You leave tonight?" she asked, her voice tight. "Before the moon rises. My father sends you to die for peace that doesn't exist." Kyle turned, meeting her eyes. "If I don't go, thousands more will die in my place." "And if I told you, I cannot bear that." His expression softened. "Then you'd give me a reason to come back." She stepped closer. "I don't want a reason, Kyle. I want a promise." He hesitated. "I can't promise what I don't control." "Then promise what you can." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he removed the small silver insignia from his cloak, a wolf's head, the mark of his command, and pressed it into her hand. "Keep this. If I fall, you'll know before the rest of the kingdom." Her fingers trembled. "And if you return, then you'll return it to me." The sound of approaching footsteps broke the moment. Kyle pulled his hood up and mounted his horse. "Go back before they see you," he said quietly. "Come back before I forget you," she whispered. He didn't look back, but she saw his hand tighten on the reins as he rode into the gathering storm. Weeks passed. The war dragged on through the rain-soaked hills of Arven, and Lysandra's borders bled again. Elara received no official word, but letters began to appear in her chambers, sealed with wax that bore no crest, each one written in Kale's hand. "My princess, the men are weary, but we hold the line. The rebels are not foreign. They are our own farmers, our own sons. The crown calls them traitors, but I see desperation in their eyes. I wonder if I've been fighting ghosts, battles for men who no longer believe in the cause we serve. If I survive this, I will not return as the man I was." Elara pressed the letter to her heart. Every word felt like a wound she longed to keep open. She wrote back in secret, using her lady-in-waiting as messenger. "Kyle, I no longer know which side deserves victory. Perhaps both have lost already. The court feasts while widows bury their dead. My father grows colder, and the queen prays for peace with eyes that no longer shine. Return soon. The roses are blooming again, though they feel like graves without you." The letters continued, fragile bridges across chaos. Until one day, the letters stopped. A month passed, then 2. The rebellion quieted, but no word of Kale came. Elara waited by the window each dawn, watching the road. The silver insignia he'd given her never left her palm. Then, one night, she overheard her father in council. "The fortress of Arven has fallen. General Varin's forces were overrun." The words struck her like an arrow. She stumbled back into the corridor, breath stolen, vision blurring. Her mother found her hours later, kneeling in the chapel, her hands stained with candle wax and tears. "He was only a soldier," the queen whispered, though her voice trembled. "He was more than that," Elara said. "He was the only part of me that was real." 2 weeks later, at dawn, the palace gates opened to a lone rider. His armor was shattered, his face marked with blood and exhaustion, but his eyes, grey and unyielding, still burned with life. Kyle Varin had returned. The court celebrated, calling him savior again. The king clasped his shoulder in public praise. But in the shadows of the great hall, when his gaze found Elara's, the silence between them said everything. The longing, the grief, the words left unsent. Later that night, when the celebrations died down, he sought her out in the chapel, the only place unwatched. She turned at the sound of his footsteps, disbelief and relief warring in her expression. "You're alive." "Barely." "Why didn't you send word?" "Because I didn't want you to hope if I couldn't keep my promise." Her voice broke. "And now that you have?" He stepped closer, his hand trembling as it reached for hers. "Now I wish I hadn't." "Why?" "Because seeing you again reminds me what I almost lost, and what I still can't have." She pressed the insignia into his palm, closing his fingers around it. "Then take it back, Cale. Take all of it back." He didn't move. "If I do, I'll never let it go again." The chapel bell tolled, and the sound echoed through the vaulted stone like a prophecy. Somewhere deep in the palace, another secret was already unraveling, one that would turn love into war and loyalty into betrayal. But for that brief moment, in the hollow silence after the bell, they stood together, two souls clinging to something already breaking. The fall of Lysandra smoke rolled across the hills like a tide of ash, the wind carrying with it the scent of fire and iron. Ilara's cloak was torn, her horse lathered with sweat, but she did not stop. The sound of distant thunder, or perhaps cannon fire, echoed across the valley. By dawn, she reached the ridge overlooking the river fort. What she saw below took her breath away. The fortress of Lysandra, once the bulwark of her father's empire, was a wound upon the land, its towers shattered, its banners torn and blackened. The river that had once glimmered like glass now ran dark with blood. And at the centre of it all, Kelvarin, the Black Wolf, still stood. He fought like a man already dead. His armour was dented, streaked with soot. His blade swung in furious arcs, every strike a prayer to a god that had long since stopped listening. Ilara dismounted before the slope, stumbling down through the smoke, her lungs burning. She called his name. Once, twice, the sound swallowed by chaos. "Cale!" He turned, disbelief flickering through exhaustion, just long enough for a blade to glance off his pauldron. He drove his sword through the attacker's throat, then caught her as she reached him, pulling her behind the half-collapsed barricade. "Are you mad?" he hissed. "What are you doing here?" Her face was streaked with ash and tears. "I came for you. You shouldn't have. You shouldn't be here, Ilara." "Don't say my name like it's a curse," she cried. "You begged for reinforcements, and my father did nothing. I couldn't." Another explosion cut her words short. The ground trembled. Kyle shielded her with his body as stones rained down from the rampart above. When the dust cleared, half the wall was gone, and the enemy banners surged forward across the river. "We can still retreat," she said desperately. "You can still live." "No," he said, calm amid the chaos. "If I run, the men will break. I stay, they stand. That's the price of command." "Then let me stay with you." He looked at her, truly looked, and something inside him shattered. "You shouldn't have come, Princess." "And yet I did." He drew her close then, not as a soldier, but as a man stripped of every defense. Their foreheads touched. "If I die here, at least let it be with your name in my mouth." "Then live," she whispered fiercely. "Live for me instead." The roar of war swallowed their words. Kyle turned, sword flashing, rallying the remnants of his forces. His voice cut through the smoke. "Hold the line! For Lysandra!" Ilara watched as he waded into the fray once more. His banner, the Black Wolf, rising through the chaos. Around him, men who had given up hope found it again, their cries joining his until the battlefield became a storm of defiance. But courage alone could not stop fate. By dusk the river ran higher, choked with the dead. The fortress was nothing but ruins. Elara helped drag the wounded into the chapel, her gown torn and soaked with blood. When Kyle returned, he was barely standing. "The king has fallen," he said quietly. "Elaris breached the capital. Lysandra is lost." She stared at him, unable to breathe. "My father?" He nodded once. "And Prince Adrian leads their armies." The words hit her harder than any blow. Her betrothed, her father's ally, had been the traitor all along. Cale dropped to one knee beside her, blood dripping from a wound at his shoulder. "I should have seen it. I should have stopped this before it began." "You couldn't have known," she whispered, pressing her hand to his wound. "But I did know," he said hoarsely. "From the first time I saw how they watched you, how they spoke of the alliance. You were never a bride, Elara. You were a weapon, and I—" His voice broke. "You what?" she breathed. "I became the fool who loved the weapon meant to destroy him." Tears burned her eyes. "Don't call it foolishness, not when it's the only truth left in this world." Outside, the final horn sounded, the signal of surrender. Kyle stood, swaying slightly. "We're out of time." He reached for his sword, but Elara caught his hand. "Don't go. If you walk out there, they'll kill you. If I stay, they'll take you." She shook her head. "Then let them. I don't care. I do." He kissed her, hard, desperate, filled with everything he could never say. "There's a hidden passage beneath the chapel. Take it. It leads to the river caves. Follow them west. The loyal houses will hide you. I won't leave you. You must. You're the last of Lysandra's blood now. If you die, the kingdom dies with you. And what of you?" He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that belongs to ghosts. "I was never meant to live in peace." Before she could stop him, he pressed a silver wolf insignia into her palm, his command seal. "So they'll know who sent you." He turned, Ishi, toward the shattered doorway, where firelight flickered and steel clashed. "Cale!" she cried. He looked back once. The flames cast him in gold and shadow. "Go, Elara! Live enough for both of us." Then he was gone. She didn't remember how long she sat there after he left. Only the sound of her own heart, beating against the silence that followed. When she finally fled through the passageway, the fortress behind her erupted into flames. The roar of collapsing stone chased her down the tunnel. And above the burning sky, the banner of Lysandra, crimson and gold, fell for the last time. Days later, among the ruins, the conquerors found what was left of the Black Wolf's command. They found no survivors. But in the ashes of the chapel, they discovered something strange. A sword driven into the stone, its blade blackened but unbroken, and at its base, a single white rose, unburned by the fire. Elara reached the western hills by nightfall. Behind her, the kingdom she had been born to rule was gone. Ahead lay exile, grief, and the echo of his last words. When she finally dared to look back, the sky above Lysandra was still burning. A tomb built not of stone, but of devotion. And somewhere in that inferno she knew, Cale Varin had kept his promise. He had broken a kingdom for her, and in its ashes he had built a tomb for himself. The tomb he built for himself. The war ended in silence. No victory songs, no parades, only the sound of crows circling the fields where men once dreamed of glory. In the weeks that followed Lysandra's fall, Elara wandered through the borderlands like a wraith. Her royal silks were long gone. She wore a soldier's cloak now, its fabric heavy with rain and road dust. Her crown, once of gold and rubies, was buried somewhere along the riverbank. A piece of her past she could no longer bear to carry. Each village she passed through whispered the same rumor. The Black Wolf lives. They said he had escaped the siege. They said he had taken a band of survivors into the mountains. They said he was building something. A fortress, a shrine, a tomb. No one knew for certain. But Ilara's heart knew. When spring came, she followed the last trail, through forests where the leaves glowed emerald in the dawn light, through valleys where snowmelt turned to mist. Days bled into weeks. Her body weakened, but her resolve only grew sharper, drawn by the pull of something beyond reason. And then, one twilight, she saw it. Built into the cliffs of the northern range stood a citadel of stone, unfinished, raw, carved by hand and sorrow. Its towers reached for the sky like fingers grasping at ghosts. At its heart rose a great archway, crowned with the sigil of a wolf. Chaol's mark. Ilara's breath caught. Her knees nearly buckled. She pressed a trembling hand to her chest, as if to quiet the storm inside her. The gates stood open. No guards, no banners, only wind. She entered. Inside, the air smelled of cold marble and pine resin. Candles burned along the walls, hundreds of them, their flames dancing in silent vigil. Along the hallways were carvings of battles, faces and names, the soldiers who had fallen at Lysandra, immortalized in stone. At the far end of the grand chamber stood a single statue. A man in armor, his head bowed, one hand resting on his sword. Beneath him, a tomb. Ilara's steps echoed as she approached. Her fingers brushed the inscription. Chaol Varin, the Wolf of Lysandra. He gave his heart where he could not give his name. Her vision blurred. No! Her whisper broke into a sob. No, please! But the truth was carved deeper than denial. He had survived the fall, long enough to build this place, long enough to honor the dead, long enough to carve his own grave. And then, when all was done, he had gone to rest among them. A faint sound stirred behind her. Footsteps. She turned sharply. A man stepped into the light. One of Chaol's old captains, his hair gone grey, his eyes hollow with memory. You knew him, Ilara breathed. He bowed low. My lady. He spoke of you often, until the end. Tell me, she whispered, tell me everything. The man's gaze drifted to the statue. He would not rest until this tomb was built. Said the kingdom needed a place to remember what love and loyalty truly cost. When it was done, he sealed the gates and sat beside that stone for 3 days. On the 4th morning, we found him still, a sword in his lap, a smile on his face. Ilara covered her mouth, her tears falling freely now. He built his own tomb. The captain nodded. For himself, for us, for you. Did he leave anything? She asked softly. Anything at all? The man hesitated, then drew from his cloak a small wooden box. He said it was to be given only if you ever came. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside lay a folded letter and a single silver ring, the wolf insignia etched along its band. She unfolded the letter, the ink faded but the handwriting steady. Ilara, if you are reading this, then the war has ended, and so have I. Do not grieve me. I have lived more in the space between your breaths than in all my years before you. I built this place so the world would not forget what we were. Not prince and soldier, not kingdom and subject, but 2 souls who defied the gods. Do not come looking for me. You are the light that survived the fire. Carry it, live, love again, if fate allows. But remember me not as the general who served your father, nor as the traitor who broke a crown. Remember me as the man who loved you beyond life. Her tears blurred the ink until the words became water. She pressed the letter to her heart. You fool, she whispered, choking back a sob. "You beautiful, impossible fool!" For a long time she stood there, the candles flickering around her, her grief spilling into the hollow silence of stone. Then, with trembling resolve, she slid the silver ring onto her finger. "If you built a tomb for yourself, Kyle," she said softly, "then I will build a kingdom for you." And she did. In the years that followed, Elara gathered the remnants of Lysandra's people, farmers, soldiers, refugees, and led them north. Beneath the shadow of the wolf's tomb, she rebuilt what had been destroyed. Not a kingdom of conquest, but one of remembrance. She outlawed war between the houses. She freed the conscripts. She turned the fortress into a sanctuary for the lost, a place where names of the fallen were etched in silver upon the walls. Every dawn, she would climb the steps to Cale's tomb and light a single candle. Every night she would whisper to him before sleep, "I lived, Kyle, just as you told me to." Years later, when her hair turned silver and her reign came to an end, she asked for one final wish. She wished to be buried beside him. And so, when she died, the kingdom mourned not for a queen, but for the woman who had turned ruin into hope. Her body was laid to rest beside the statue of the Black Wolf, their hands carved together in stone. Above them, an inscription was added. He broke a kingdom for her and built a tomb for himself. She rebuilt the world he left behind. The candles still burn there, even centuries later, 1,000 small flames flickering against the dark. Travelers who come to the mountains say that when the wind is right, they can hear a woman's voice whispering through the halls, followed by a man's quiet laughter. And on the highest wall of the wolf's tomb, 2 banners hang side by side, one gold, one black, swaying together in eternal peace. The kingdom that remembered, the years became centuries. Empires rose and crumbled into dust. New kings carved their banners into the world, and old songs faded into myth. But in the far north, where the mountains touched the clouds, there stood a citadel of white stone and silver flame, the tomb of the wolf and the queen. It became a place of pilgrimage. Wanderers came with stories, lovers came with vows, and soldiers came to weep. They brought flowers from every land, roses from the east, lilies from the valley, wild heather from the north, and they whispered the same tale in reverent tones. He broke a kingdom for her and built a tomb for himself. No one truly knew their names anymore, not as they once were. To the world, they had become legend, the nameless general and the forsaken princess who had loved beyond duty, beyond blood, beyond death. But those who listened closely, in the hush of dawn when the mist curled around the mountain, swore they could still hear 2 voices, soft as wind, strong as memory. 300 years after the fall of Lysandra, a young scribe named Daran arrived at the tomb. He had travelled from the southern academies, where history was more ink than truth. The scholars called the tale of the Black Wolf fable, a parable about the cost of pride. But Daran wanted to see for himself. He climbed the marble steps, boots crunching on frost, his breath misting in the thin air. The great doors stood open, as they had for centuries, welcoming all who sought remembrance. Inside, the air glowed with candlelight. Each flame trembled in the stillness, as if alive. And upon the dais at the centre of the hall stood the twin statues, the queen and the general, hands joined across time. Daran stood before them, struck silent. They were carved so vividly that he almost expected them to breathe. The queen's face was serene, her crown resting lightly on her curls. The general's expression held quiet strength, his sword sheathed at his side. Between them, the stone inscription read, "He broke a kingdom for her and built a tomb for himself." She rebuilt the world he left behind. He took out his quill, writing by the light of the candles. They say he defied kings for her, that his sword turned against his own crown, that love made a traitor of a hero and a queen of a prisoner. Perhaps that is true. But if so, what greater victory could there be? He paused, setting the quill down. As he lingered in the silence, something caught his eye, a faint shimmer near the base of the statue. He crouched, brushing away centuries of dust. There, carved in smaller letters, hidden beneath the rest, was an epitaph he had never read in any book. The heart does not forget. It only learns to endure. Darin exhaled softly. His chest tightened with emotion he could not name. He closed his journal and whispered, "I'll tell your story right this time. Not as kings remember, but as lovers would." As he turned to leave, a sudden gust swept through the tomb, snuffing out half the candles. The air filled with the faint scent of roses, and for the briefest heartbeat, Darin thought he saw them. Two figures at the far end of the hall, standing hand in hand, bathed in golden light. He blinked. They were gone. Only the shadows remained. But the warmth lingered, not of ghosts, but of love that had never truly died. Outside, the dawn broke over the mountains. The valley below shimmered with the glow of new life, fields, villages, laughter. The kingdom of Lysandra had been reborn, not as an empire, but as a people united by remembrance. At the city gates, a plaque bore the same words carved into the tomb. "May no love be forgotten. May no sacrifice fade." Children played beneath it, chasing each other through sunlight. The storytellers sang of Elara and Kyle, though the names had changed with time. Some called them the Rose and the Wolf. Others simply said they were the ones who chose love over crowns. And when night fell, the stars over the northern mountains burned brighter than anywhere else in the world, 2 of them side by side. The people called them the lovers of Lysandra. In every generation, someone would make the journey to the wolf's tomb. Some came seeking courage, others came seeking forgiveness. All left changed. They would touch the cold stone where 2 hands met, close their eyes, and feel something stir deep within, a promise older than time. That love, true love, does not end. It endures, it rebuilds, it remembers. And so the kingdom lived on, not through kings or crowns, but through the eternal whisper of 2 souls who had once defied the world.